Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. As the American people started to vote this morning, one of the most divisive and bizarre campaigns for the presidency came to an end. It could be called a contest between two of the most unpopular candidates ever to a contest for America's top job. The last campaign rallies in Michigan and North Carolina were an amazing spectacle and celebration of democracy, the likes of which the world doesn't find anywhere else. But they can't hide the fact that the United States is more divided than it's ever been, between young and old, men and women, less educated and more educated, and finally, between African Americans and Hispanics on the one hand and whites on the other. So whoever wins tonight is likely to face an enormous challenge as president. With me to talk about the campaign that's ended, the outcome that's expected, and the 4 years that are about to begin, are India's former ambassador to America, Lalit Mansingh, former Foreign Secretary Kamal Sibal, a fellow of the Brookings Institution, Dhruv Jaishankar, the Financial Times South Asia Bureau Chief Amy Kazmin, and joining us from Washington is the senior journalist of the Washington Post, Catherine Rampell, and the former editor of the Times of India, Gautam Adhikari. Catherine Rampell, voting has been underway in America for a couple of hours. What sort of day is it? Have you got the sort of weather that could encourage a large turnout?
Well, I can only speak about the weather where I am, which is New York City, and it's a lovely day here. The lines are very long, which is somewhat striking given that this is not a contested state. New York always votes for the Democratic candidate. The reports are from other states which are contested that the lines are incredibly long, that people started queuing hours ago, and that there's a lot of anxiety, but a lot of motivation to go out to the polls.
The scenes that we've seen on television were long queues snaking outside Virginia and North Carolina polling booths. Apparently, people had lined up from 5 and 5:30 in the morning. Are people voting with a keen sense of anticipation and the keen awareness that this is a critical election, possibly a turning point for the country?
Absolutely. A lot of voters, including myself, see this as a struggle for the soul of the American democracy. It's basically an existential question. And beyond that, we've actually seen early voting numbers in very, very high rates. So today is the official election day, but a number of states allow people to cast ballots early. And we've seen record numbers of people casting ballots, led by surges in Latino voters, who are an increasingly large demographic, important demographic in the American electorate. So we've seen people turning out, showing their commitment to vote for their preferred candidate for several days now, in fact, and it looks like we may have record turnout, at the very least from early voting and from particular demographics this election.
Gautam Adhikari, I believe, according to what I've seen and read, that something like 45% of the people have already voted in early voting. Do you accept that the early voting figures, to the extent to which they're accurately known, suggest that the early voters are tilting towards Hillary Clinton?
Well, I don't know, but it looks like part of the early voting is heavily Hispanic. And it's assumed here that given Mr. Trump's various statements about Hispanics, which were not very friendly, that there would be a big Hispanic turnout. And it's been unprecedented in places like Florida, and I'm told in Georgia, and everywhere where early voting is allowed, there has been very heavy voting, including here in one of the 3 states that make up the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, which is Maryland. Maryland, a lot of people, I think in record numbers, voted early. And as you observed in Virginia, there are very low, they don't allow early voting in Virginia except in certain circumstances, but it's all voting today, and people have lined up from well before sunset in Virginia.
I want to ask you briefly, Catherine, about the turnout of the Hispanic vote and the African American vote. I gather that the African American vote, possibly understandably, the turnout is lower than it was in 2012, and that's probably because Barack Obama is not a candidate. But the Hispanics, who usually don't vote in large numbers, have turned out hugely this time round. Do the two together suggest good news for Hillary Clinton, particularly the large Hispanic turnout? Although perhaps the reduced Afro-American one will be a little disappointing.
The high numbers of Latino, Hispanic voters are probably very encouraging to Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump has seemingly done everything he can to alienate those voters, to make them feel that they are not welcome in this country, even those who are here legally, who are naturalized citizens, who are natural-born citizens, for that matter. So many of them, I think, are inspired to vote for his opponent. As for the African American voter numbers, it actually varies by state. The numbers that I had seen, at least as of last night, suggested that in North Carolina, African American turnout is down, potentially because of some laws that have made it harder to vote, that not coincidentally, I think, have made it harder for, have specifically affected voters who are more likely to lean Democratic, including African American voters. But in other states, actually, African American turnout, at least in the early numbers, was up. Relative, I think, to 2012. I'm not sure about 2008. 2008 was an unusual year. But in any case, I think, as I said earlier, there's a lot of motivation from non-white voters in particular to vote for Hillary Clinton. It seems that they are going to, move heaven and earth for many of them to actually get to the polls and vote for a candidate whom they feel has their best interests at heart.
Before I come to the mood of the country, Amy Kasman, as it goes into this election, I want to ask you a question about something that you heard Catherine say, that this is really a battle for the soul of America. Is the idea of America, as Americans have traditionally understood it, at stake today?
I think there is a definite contest in the vision of what is America. I think that, America has always been a nation of immigrants, and that is very much entrenched in its DNA. But at the same time, there's always been resistance to the new waves of immigrants. I think what we're seeing Donald Trump, who is tapping into a longing for a past vision of America, a mainly white majority America, not just a white majority America, but a male-dominated America, an America where basically white men ruled the roost. There was a very, very funny parody video that was circulating where basically you understand that when this whole idea of make America great again seems to be referring to some idealized version of the 1950s where, women were staying at home and baking muffins and, the men kind of ruled the country. I think Hillary Clinton and the Democrat Party has a different kind of vision of America where it's a much more inclusive vision which embraces ethnic diversity, which embraces, say, gay rights, something that many Trump supporters are very uncomfortable with. So I think it is a battle of the heart and soul of America and the kind of vision of society it should be. Also, I think there's a real vision of a question about democracy and the vision of democracy where some of the statements that Donald Trump has made have been really undermining of the democratic institutions.
Mr. Mansingh, there's no doubt that the world is fixated by the American election. Perhaps as no earlier election has actually captured people's attention outside America. And that's very true of our country as well. Is that partly because we see America literally tearing itself apart in the process of choosing who the president is? The campaign has been so divisive, so bitter, that we feel as if the country is tearing itself apart, and that's a absorbing thing to watch happen, because it's a spectacle of democracy, it's a celebration of democracy, but sometimes the spectacle seems to be bigger than the celebration.
Well, I've observed a lot of American elections in the past. Let me tell you, most of them are very keenly contested, and it would appear in the election process that the country is being torn apart. But I think there's an inherent stability, because America accepts that it's a divided country, divided by two parties, and people have party loyalties. So what you're seeing is a contest for undecided votes, which is roughly about 10% of the electorate. So I wouldn't say America is tearing itself apart. What is remarkable about this election is the extent of ethnic polarization, which I don't think we have seen in any election campaign before. And this is a new element which is a bit scary, that America was always bipartisan but never on ethnic lines.
Would you accept that, Dhruv, that this is a divisive election but not one that's actually reflecting the country tearing itself apart, that is journalistic exaggeration, but the divisiveness, the bitterness, the polarization is extreme?
Well, I think we have to take into account the fact that institutionally America is still very strong in many ways. It still has a very powerful military, it still has a very powerful bureaucracy, it has state governments that are very powerful, a very powerful court system. So I think all of that will remain regardless of what happens in a presidential election. That being said, I think I would agree with some of the other panelists that we've seen extreme division across gender lines, across ethnic lines, but also the other thing, I mean, I wouldn't say it's so, this election actually does stand out for being not just a celebration of democracy, but in many ways it's been quite farcical. If you think of all the controversies that we've seen over the last few months, from plagiarism to pneumonia to emails to Miss America. I mean, it's been really quite a farcical election, and I think many people, if you'd had somebody trying to write a comedy about U.S. politics, I don't think a dark comedy, I don't think they could have done a better job than this.
Would you say, Kamal Sibal, that for all its divisiveness and polarization, for all the unfortunate comments that Trump has made and the accusations leveled against Hillary Clinton, the American election process, the very way in which the campaign has unfolded, is an object lesson to other democracies, that America has proven through this campaign that it is truly a great democracy because of the way everything is up for contest, everything is covered by the media, and everything is open to the people to choose.
Well, if you call poor candidates who are disliked by large sections of the population on both sides of the political divide, candidates which are ridden with scandals in terms of their character, in terms of their financial dealings, the kind of vituperation that we see in this campaign, the abuse that is being hurled at each other, the low level of the debate, I don't think that is an object lesson in democracy. On the contrary, many people will ask if this most powerful democracy in the world, the oldest democracy in the world, if it is becoming so dysfunctional that it cannot put up candidates who are viable, who will earn the respect of the electorate, who will earn the respect of the rest of the world, and who can be counted upon to follow policies which would be helpful for peace and stability throughout, and essentially would not allow internal American divisions to become a factor in external politics, then I don't at all agree that this is a good image that America is projecting. Let me add a couple of points. One is that for America, a very important element of their foreign policy has been the spread of democracy worldwide, and to project to the world how they are a beacon of democracy for the rest of the world. I'm afraid this message is not only not gone across, but America's soft power has suffered a great deal, and many other countries who are not democratic, who are authoritarian, will actually derive a lot of comfort from the way America has conducted the elections. No wonder, therefore, Iran has been actually showing all the debates that have taken place on television, because they think that this will convey to the Iranian public much more effectively than their own propaganda about the nature of US democracy.
Let me put that to you, Catherine Ramble. I began by asking Kamal Sibal, our former Foreign Secretary, that is the head of our Foreign Service, that this was a wonderful celebration of democracy, and America was showing to the world that it is still a great democracy. You've heard virtually the opposite from Kamal Sibal, that it may be a great democracy, but you put up candidates who, to misuse Hillary Clinton's phrase, are deplorable. They're unpopular, they have little to offer. One is pretty bizarre in the comments he makes. The other lady is dogged by corruption allegations. That as a result, America is not showing off, it's showing itself up.
I think there is a lot of concern about that here in the United States, that we like to think of ourselves as the city on the hill, as a model for other countries, particularly those that have poor records in terms of human rights, suffrage, other measures, and there's a lot of concern that we are not holding ourselves to that same standard. One of our presidential candidates in particular has been arguing that the election system is rigged, that it's not a true democracy, and those statements themselves hurt faith in the institution of democracy here, in faith in our government, and presumably, discourage other countries that may be considering more democratic reforms from actually undertaking them. I personally am very concerned about Trump in particular, his comments about human rights, about torture. What message does that send to the rest of the world about our values? That's why I began this conversation by saying this election, it's a fiercely fought election. It's very competitive, but it's not just any other election. I think it's very much a struggle for the soul of American democracy, what we stand for here, and what image we hope to project across the world.
Gautam Adhikari, this struggle for the soul of the American democracy, this struggle over the idea of America has revealed awful divisions in the country. America is divided, young versus old, women versus men, African Americans and Hispanics versus whites, less educated versus the more educated. And then, of course, there's the broader Democrat versus Republican division. How worrying are these fractures as they're emerging? Or do you believe that once the process is over, the results are announced, it'll all heal up miraculously?
I think I agree with what Lalit said earlier, that the American institutions by themselves are still pretty strong. I mean, they are being affected by a somewhat dysfunctional political process right now. This election has shown it out, the political process. And a lot of it is because of this sharp polarization that, in my view at least, is being caused by demographic changes that have been going on in America for at least 20 years, but have almost come to a head right now. The white Christian population of America is now is not going to be a majority in about 10 years' time, and it's going to be a plurality. And the total number of people who are not white and non-whites are actually a majority. Therefore, this is going to be an issue that will dog American politics for at least one or two elections more. But the trend is quite clear that minorities, women, and liberal whites or progressives, they have sort of teamed together to support Hillary Clinton in this election, whereas there is a consolidation of very strong white religious support and relatively lesser educated people behind Mr. Trump. And that is a very sharp division that is, I think, somewhat unique to this election, not to previous elections. But that's why this election is exceptional, and that's why it might be very decisive in the way the idea of America is, whether it's strengthened or weakened, will depend a lot on the results today.
Amy Kasman, something else that's emerged very strongly and very decisively during the campaign is a anti-Washington DC mood. It's almost as if everyone in one way or another sees Washington DC as the opponent, the other, the enemy. How do you explain that to an audience in India, this anti-Washington mood?
I think that obviously that mood is strongly felt by the Trump supporters. That mood was also captured by Bernie Sanders on the left of Hillary Clinton. So both of them kind of have embraced that, although from obviously very, very different perspectives. I think, I think this does reflect some of the anxieties of globalization, of change. I think that, among the Trump supporters, we have the people who are seeing their working class jobs disappear and migrate to places like China, like Mexico, even in some cases places like India, and whose jobs aren't coming back and who aren't prepared to participate in, say, the new high-tech economy, and who somehow feel that that Washington and the government should have been doing more to help Americans prepare for this kind of economic shift of power that's happening in the world. Among the Bernie Sanders supporters, there's a feeling that, many of those people, when they look across the pond at the social welfare states of Europe, feel that the government isn't really doing enough to provide basic social welfare for people in terms of education. You have a middle class, many of whom feel that their children won't be as economically successful as they've they've been. So there's a lot of anxiety in America about the direction, about whether America is getting better off as a society or worse off.
Mr. Man Singh, we in India are used to looking upon our political class as crooks, distrusting them and considering them corrupt literally across the board. But it seems Americans are developing a habit of looking at their politicians in a very similar light. In fact, Trump today, in his Michigan closing rally, said, "Today is our Independence Day from the corrupt political class." You've been ambassador in Washington. Are you surprised at the extent to which Trump seems to be touching a resonant chord with people when he talks of Washington and politicians in particular as corrupt?
Well, I agree with Amy that there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of anxiety amongst groups who are affected by the changes. Globalization took America to dizzying heights, but now the economy is sputtering. America is losing its predominant place in global affairs. It's being challenged by China. So Americans are adjusting to change badly, and this is reflected in this election. So the democratic process allows you to let off steam, and maybe a change of leadership may do something good.
The problem with letting off steam is sometimes the water boils over as well.
Well, we haven't seen much violence, which sometimes happens in democracies like ours. So I think there is an inbuilt process of division and discord, which will eventually be patched over after the elections. Consider that when they go in for the primaries, the parties are tearing each other apart within their parties, and then they come together. Bernie Sanders, having opposed Hillary Clinton, finally supports her.
But that's not so true of the Republicans.
Well, you see that bipartisanship eventually comes back after the elections.
You wanted
That's
to come
what
in
I've
quickly?
seen.
I mean, I wanted to say that traditionally I do think that, the parties have agreed on the process and have respected the process, and divisions have closed over, even if everyone is not happy with the results. But I think one thing that's been particularly alarming about this election is the way that Donald Trump, before the results are even out, has been raising serious doubts among his supporters about the credibility of the process, which is something that I think is fairly unprecedented. And the way he's calling it a rigged election and the process is rigged. We've not seen this kind of language. In the past, both people from major parties have, basically expressed their faith in the legitimacy of the process. Donald Trump is undermining that, and I feel like he's playing with forces that could be dangerous, and we don't really know what's going to happen in the aftermath if he doesn't win.
Dhruv Jaishankar, not so long ago you were resident in Washington. How do you believe the American people respond to this constant allegation, this repeated refrain from Donald Trump, that this is a rigged election, that it will be stolen from the American people, that the system is out to do them down?
Well, I think we've seen an increase in, over the past few elections, I don't think this is a completely novel phenomenon, but we have seen an increase in anti-Beltway sentiment and anti-establishment, anti-Washington sentiment. And in some ways, there's this idea that there's a Washington consensus on both sides, amongst Republicans and Democrats, a consensus on capitalism, a consensus on globalization, a consensus on some more interventionist evangelical foreign policy. And there has been this pushback against that, a lot of distrust, and Trump has really been tapping into that quite successfully. Now, I think by questioning the very democratic process, though, I think he's actually taken it taken it much further than many other people had anticipated, and it's unclear whether that has actually been very successful. Many people may have skepticism about Washington, but this idea that their vote will not count, that the system is rigged, may not resonate as much with the wider public. What we will have to see in the coming hours, within the next 24 hours at least, is how Donald Trump makes a concession speech, or whether he even makes a concession speech after the results are out.
You're assuming he will need to make a concession speech. It's possible that you may have the same surprise as Britain produced in June over Brexit. It may be Hillary making the concession.
Of course.
Now, let me bring you in very quickly, Kamal Sibal. What do you make of the fact that the mood in America seems to be turning against globalization fairly comprehensively? There's a great suspicion of the way it's working out.
Well, I'm surprised actually, because United States was the biggest force behind globalization. Globalization was, of course, an economic project, but it was also the globalization of American values and American democracy and everything else. And there's been a push for opening up markets worldwide, and the belief has been that if the market economy and private enterprise are allowed full play, then this will mean rising prosperity all around, and everybody would benefit. Now, what has really happened is that the American corporations have been able to shift their manufacturing to various parts of the globe, and they have obviously increased their profit margins. What then has happened internally in America is that wealth has started getting concentrated in the hands of the rich, creating more inequalities on the ground. But I think globalization is simply an excuse or vilifying globalization is simply an excuse for the failure of proper management of the American economy. The financial crisis of 2008 had nothing to do with globalization. It was basically extremely lax, unregulated bank management which caused the financial crisis, the impact of which is being felt globally, and as a result of that, globalization has got a bad name.
Two very quick questions before I take a break. First to you, Catherine Bramble. Has the name Crooked Hillary and the whole business to do with her emails and using servers that are personal rather than official damaged Hillary? Or has she got a bit of a Teflon skin and survived?
Both, I would say. Certainly, the Clintons have been dogged by, both Hillary and her husband, Bill Clinton, have been dogged by sort of whiffs of scandal for decades at this point. There has never actually really been a smoking gun that has been discovered, but it's always this sort of air of scandal that happens to surround her. And her unfavorable numbers are quite high here in the United States. People don't trust her. They don't see her as honest. But she has managed to survive. Again and again, she has shown herself able to overcome these negative numbers and to achieve victory. The question, of course, today is whether she will win, and if she wins and becomes the first American female president, how will she be received? Will she be seen as a legitimate president, given a lot of the rhetoric we've been talking about a rigged election, et cetera, and the fact that Republicans in Congress have already been laying the groundwork to discredit her because of these, appearances of scandals and otherwise. So she has survived, but I think even if she is elected, she has a tough road ahead of her in terms of governance.
Very quickly, Gautam Adhikari, before I take a break, what about Donald Trump? Has the whole business of not paying taxes, which the New York Times exposed, and the groping and philandering that's also come out in the process, damaged him, or has he successfully brushed it aside? Are people convinced this is just locker room talk and nothing more?
Well, I think the locker room talk did damage his prospects, and he went significantly down in the polls for a while, until James Comey of the FBI came up 11 days before the election and said that an inquiry into Hillary's emails has been reopened, or as they said, by the FBI, and that immediately stopped that halt and actually started bringing Hillary down. But if you look at the statistics here, Donald Trump's solid base of, let's say, somewhere between 38 to 42% of the electorate is very committed. And they are unlikely to be moved by either this locker room talk or by his not paying taxes. They have different sets of commitments, and there's a different reason for that loyalty that they have towards Donald Trump. But it's also true that the independents and the undecideds, they may have shifted ground in between, to and fro. And what happens today will show how much it has actually affected anybody. I personally think it has not affected either Hillary Clinton's base or Donald Trump's base. It's really those in between, and there are very few of those right now. People are committed, they know, and many of them have already voted in their early voting.
Let's take a break at that point. When I come back, I want to turn to the big question. When can we start expecting the first exit polls? What are the critical key states to watch out for? And then, what happens not to the winner? We know what happens to the winner. What about the loser? Might she go to jail? Or will he contest the outcome? See you in a moment's time for the second part of tonight's show. Welcome back. You're watching To The Point, and we're looking at the American elections. Voting has begun already right across the United States, except probably not in the West. And in a couple of hours' time, the results will start coming out, first with the exit polls and then, of course, that grand outcome. Let me put this to you before I come to this question of the exit polls in the key states. One of the most striking things was the manner in which the Obamas, both the president and the first lady, threw themselves into the campaign, and particularly over the last 10 days. Do you think Barack Obama and Michelle have made a significant difference to Hillary's prospects?
I do think that the Obamas are hugely popular. They especially command still so much influence within the African American community. I think they very much feel that a lot of what they stood for is at stake and could be undone by a Trump presidency. So I feel they have a lot at stake. I feel that certainly it will have boosted her prospects. I think that, like, for example, when Al Gore ran after the Clinton administration, he didn't want Bill Clinton to campaign for him, even though Bill was very popular. So it is possible that some of the affection, I think Michelle Obama in particular has been a very, very powerful advocate. She's, I think, really mobilized women. She's really articulated, and because she's sort of free to say what she feels, and as the mother of two daughters, I think she's been very effective in mobilizing women and really sort of calling out what a lot of women feel is kind of underpinning the Trump candidacy. So I do think that they should give Hillary some boost.
I noticed, Catherine, that there was a very different tone in the last rallies when you heard Hillary Clinton and compared her message to that from Donald Trump. Hillary was consciously and deliberately looking to the future, talking about a new, brave, bright, forward-looking America. Trump sounded much more negative. Did that contrast come across?
Yes, actually, it's interesting, particularly in light of Republican criticism of Obama over the last 8 years, that he has often been accused of being insufficiently pro-American, that he has, downplayed America's strengths, etc., that he has gone on an apology tour about America's faults, that he is not sufficiently gung-ho about how wonderful and spectacular America is. And we've actually seen that rhetoric flipped somewhat in this campaign, where the Republican candidate has been describing America as no longer great, that America needs to be great again, implying that today it is less than great, that it is doing badly. And it's fundamentally, I think, a message of nostalgia, a somewhat more negative message about the state of America today. Hillary Clinton, by contrast, has been trying to use rhetoric that celebrates how far the United States has come, in her view, on civil rights, on economic growth, on a bunch of other measures, some of which may or may not resonate with the American public. And so she has been casting herself as both more positive about the U.S. economy, and that if we keep things continuing on their current trajectory, that is the direction we should be going, and that those are the policies we should embrace. Whereas Donald Trump, of course, has been saying we need change, we need to revert back to the way things were, and we need to undo many of the legacies of the current Democratic administration.
Gautam Adhikari, it's obviously going to be a long night for everyone in America, but when can we expect to see the first exit polls?
Well, I think there haven't been any exit polls that have been discussed, except perhaps one in Florida, where they said after some early voting exit polling that, well, I don't know whether to believe this or not, it's 28% of registered Republicans have voted for Hillary Clinton, which was very surprising. And if it's true, then Hillary Clinton is definitely going to win Florida. That's what it looks like. The other exit polling is going on, and I don't think we'll get anything before 8 o'clock when the polls close. And if the election verdict is fairly clear, that is, that there is a good 5 or 6% point difference, and there's a clear majority in the electoral college for one candidate or the other. I personally think it was likely to be Hillary Clinton. In that case, we should have a fairly decisive outcome by 11 o'clock US time, which would be probably 9:30 in the morning your time.
One other quick question, Gautam Adhikari, for the benefit of Indian audiences who will be watching but may not understand the complexity of the American electoral system, can you identify the key swing states that viewers who stay up late at night in India should be watching out for?
Yeah, these are called the battleground states out here, and I think you can include states like Florida, North Carolina, Ohio, and perhaps some other states which have suddenly come into play, like Arizona, which has long been considered a Republican state. It's way down in the south. But because of changes in the demographic structure of Arizona, it's turning, light blue at least, which means it's turning that the Democrats have a chance of winning that. At least Hillary has. Nevada is another place. But the key states to watch would be North Carolina, Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and maybe New Hampshire, which doesn't have that many electoral college votes. It has only 4, but still Trump is hoping to win New Hampshire.
Let me put this to you. You've watched America's ambassador closely, and you've been back frequently thereafter. Do you take seriously something that Trump has repeatedly said, that if he wins, Hillary will go to jail?
I don't think that's likely to happen. The American president has a lot of powers, but keeping the law aside and taking decisions like this are not really that of the United States president. There's a due process of law. If she has to go to jail, it has to be through a judicial process.
But will he start that process? Because he is a very unusual man who does very strange things.
He can ask the FBI to do further investigation, but that doesn't mean that the FBI will agree to put her in jail.
But will he gun for her?
Oh yeah, definitely he will gun for her. He had promised the electorate that he'll do that.
And he will fulfill that promise?
Oh, I'm sure he will do it if he comes to power. But that's a question mark.
What about the opposite, Kamal Sibal? If Hillary wins, and certainly that is people's expectation at the moment, but I should add, people had similar expectations about Remain winning in June in England and Brexit won. But if Hillary does win, do you believe Trump will challenge the outcome? He's repeatedly said it will be rigged, that he's refused to confirm that he'll accept the result. But will he take that critical step of challenging the outcome, or do you think that's unlikely?
Well, he can challenge it in different ways. One, of course, is the rank and file will create a lot of noise everywhere about the election and in a sense, poison the entire atmosphere. That is one. The other is that they may keep pressing on Hillary on the email issue, keep demanding more investigation, prod the FBI to go ahead, keep raising this issue, and it'll hang like a Damocles sword on Clinton's head. A lot of people intensely dislike her. The affairs of the Clinton Foundation, they will continue to be exposed, but more importantly is what happens in the Senate and the House. If the Republicans retain the Senate, as is likely, and even if they win the House, then I think Hillary's presidency is finished. Much in the same way as Obama had huge difficulties in working with the Congress and could not implement his program, Hillary is so controversial that in her case the situation would be worse. And to that extent, it will be a wasted presidency. In many ways, she will not be allowed to function. And finally, I will like to say that Hillary is not a candidate for change. If Trump and his base and other parts of the American public are feeling frustrated at where America has reached at this point in time, it's because of the policies with which Hillary Clinton has been associated and Obama has been associated. It's a reaction to their policies. And she promises continuity. I can't see continuity bringing about vitality in American democracy, in American functioning, in American administration, or in American foreign policy. It will be much the same. The same mistakes will be committed. the same direction will be maintained in foreign policy, and I think it doesn't augur well. Not that Trump's policies are not going to create new crises.
Quite right. But let's not get into the details of Trump and Hillary's policies. Let's wait to decide which of them is going to come to power before we do that. Are there any signs from the turnout that you can see about what impact this will have on the Senate and the House of Representatives? Because 1/3 of the Senate is up for re-election and the whole House of Representatives.
I think it's important to also highlight the incredible schism that the rise and candidacy of Donald Trump has highlighted within the Republican Party. Mr. Sybil talked about the Republicans will block her and it'll be a wasted presidency. I think that is a concern, but I'm not quite sure that I would go that far, because it's important to remember that a lot of mainstream Republicans, Hillary worked very well with them when she was in the Senate. She collaborated very effectively with a lot of mainstream Republicans. So it's not so clear that every Republican will be out to completely sabotage her presidency, and in fact that she is seen more as a person who might be able to bridge tensions across the aisle than Barack Obama was. So I think it's important to realize that the Republican Party itself is very much a house divided, and after this election, a lot of mainstream Republicans may be very pleased to see that Trump actually fail. It's so many Republicans, mainstream Republicans, have come out and condemned him, condemned his candidacy.
Although Paul Ryan, the Speaker, has now begun to support him in the last few days.
Yes, but I mean, I think that's just sheer political opportunism, where somebody is concerned that if he wins and he doesn't. I mean, I think Paul Ryan is only looking after Paul Ryan's own skin, but I think a lot of mainstream Republicans on a very principled position are very uncomfortable with Trump. So it would be too early to say that the entire Republican Party will try to sabotage a potential Clinton presidency.
Gautam Adhikari, today, of course, is the critical D-Day that everyone's been waiting for. The voting is underway. Do you have any sense of the mood in the Clinton and Trump camps? Is there any sense that one side is getting a little depressed and the other perhaps celebratory?
I mean, before I answer that, may I just go back to something that Kamal said earlier? And, continuity and change, it's not very clear whether people actually want change. After all, if Hillary is the candidate of continuity, she is leading in almost every opinion poll. It's also seen by many that although there was a crisis, say 8 years ago, with the American economy, right now the American economy is doing extremely well. Unemployment is down to 4.9%. Wages have started rising from 2015. There have been a million jobs created in the last 8 years. So people might just want continuity rather than change. So it's something that is being debated. And if Hillary Clinton has a sufficiently large or wide majority, if she wins, then she might just carry a majority in the Senate with her. The House is unlikely. But I'm sticking my neck out here, but I have a feeling that the Democrats are extremely optimistic at this point of time. And there is a sense of foreboding and even gloom in the Donald Trump camp.
And that is becoming apparent as today spins its course, that there is foreboding and gloom in the Trump camp and a sense of expectation and celebration in the Clinton one. Is that right, Gautam Adhikari?
Yeah, that's the feeling I get when I can only go by what I see on television and what the conversations that I have in and around the Washington area.
Let me put this to you, Mr. Mansingh. This has been a campaign that has been dramatic in every sense. Has it changed America? And can the demons that have been unleashed, or at least identified by the press, be put back into the bottle?
Well, I think Americans have noted that there are deep pockets of anger within America, and their concerns need to be addressed. Hillary Clinton herself has changed a lot of her earlier stand. She's now gone against the TPP, and she's against trade agreements in general now. So things are changing.
Is she genuinely against them, or is that only a political position that she's taken because of the fact that Bernie Sanders support she needs?
No, but the trade agreements are genuinely unpopular because people believe that Americans have lost jobs because of that. and that the Chinese are going to take advantage of the situation.
So then you're agreeing with the proposition that this campaign has changed America. America under the new president will be different to the America Barack Obama leaves behind.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Would you accept that this is a seminal moment, not just because of the Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump struggle that's ending, but also because the very nature of the campaign has revealed things, demons as I called them a moment ago, that will end up changing both the reality of America as well as the way we perceive it? We have only 1 minute for you to answer.
I think America is moving in a certain direction. I think the Trump candidacy is a backlash against that, but I think the movement in that direction is slightly inexorable. There may be a pause, but I think, I don't think we're going to wake up and find a radically changed America unless perhaps Trump confounds the expectations of the polls and we awake to President Donald Trump.
Well, that would be an incredible shock, particularly for those who don't want it. But the big question is, how much will Trump change America? Because quite often, people who come to office promising radical change end up being people who continue with the past quite easily. But that's something that we have to wait and find out. At the moment, we don't even know who's going to win. My thanks to both of you for coming to studio. My thanks also to all my other guests for joining me, both from India and from America. We'll be back tomorrow night to actually look at the outcome, the results, and to analyze in particular what the new president, whoever he or she may be, means for India. But for tonight, goodbye, good night.